everybody. Middle school is a challenge for a lot of people.
I have a quick question. Everyone, is it okay? We have a YouTube channel, and so for anyone who did not have the chance to access this webinar, is that okay if this is recorded?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Just letting you know. Okay, cool. Sorry, carry on. Okay. Okay, so the way this is going to work, you guys submitted questions, and then we'll go through the questions first, and then it'll be time for just like open questions after that. Okay?
Yep.
All right, let's start. Okay, so the first question that was submitted, let's open this. Okay, so Ryan, there are many ways to become a teacher in America. Which pathway do you recommend? For example, a teaching residency, a charter school, graduate school, etc.
With teaching, yeah, there are quite a few options that you could pursue. What I'm doing right now is something called Mississippi Teacher Corps. It's an alternate route program, which means that within a lot of states, there are critical needs districts where they struggle to fill teacher shortages. All over the country, there's a problem where there's an oversupply of qualified teachers, but you don't have the teachers going to the places that need teachers the most. So many states have these alternate route programs where they'll take people who aren't education majors and don't, excuse me, don't have a background in education, and you can get a provisional license, a regular license, or an emergency license, and you could get hooked into a teaching job that way. But the first step would always be to go and look at the State Department of Education's website and find out what the requirements are for getting a position in the first place. Most of my experience is within the public school system. I'm a public school teacher right now. I went to a public university. I worked at a public university for a while, worked at public schools in Korea, went to public schools for my entire life. So I can't say too much about charters and private schools. However, in the Fulbright alumni network, I've heard, I think from Vinny, that there's this charter school network in New York City called Democracy Prep.
Yeah.
And a Korea alumnus husband is the founder of the school, I believe.
Oh, wow.
And they like accepting Fulbright Korea ETAs because the Fulbright Korea ETA program gives you pretty good training for getting involved within that network and hitting the ground running. So that's a good option you could look at if you're interested in charter schools in New York City. There are also graduate programs that you could look into. With graduate programs, though, there are a few caveats. Recently, I read a report. You might want to read this too. It's by a professor at Columbia named Arthur Levine, and the report is called Educating School Teachers. And it gives you a quick overview of what outstanding teaching programs have in common, and it tells you things that you should look out for. Because there's a situation in the U.S. where with education programs, they're often what they call cash cows for universities. And so the quality of education programs ranges across the board, and just the amount of education programs that there are is kind of overwhelming. It's one of the most popular undergrad majors, graduate majors. So being familiar with what you're looking for before you consider graduate schools is a good option. Otherwise, with teaching positions, it really depends. The United States is a massive country. Lots of different systems, lots of different localities, lots of different states. So if you have a specific question about specific places where you would like to apply or specific types of schools that you're looking at, I could try and connect you with someone who might know something about that. There are also I think there are a lot of TFA alumni within the Fulbright network that you could reach out to. And there are also others who have gone back to the States and taught in charter schools, private schools, public schools. If you're interested in public schools, I could give you more details about that. And if you're interested in specific program recommendations for grad school, I looked into it a bit, so I could share some of those with you. A lot of the top universities like Harvard, Columbia, Stanford, they have pretty good colleges of education. And then within that report I told you about, Arthur Levine, Educating School Teachers, at the end of the report, they have model education programs that they refer to, and a lot of them are smaller teacher colleges. I think one of them was called Alverno College, Emporia State College. Yeah, there are plenty of options.
Awesome. Okay, question number 2. What culture shocks did you have coming from teaching in Korea to teaching in the U.S.?
Oh boy. Well, when I first came back from Korea, I spent about 6 months just not doing much. I hadn't seen my family for a while because I had gone away for university and I had studied abroad for a while, then went to Korea. So I just spent 6 months to chill out. Then that January of 2014, I enrolled at community college and started volunteering, doing other things, getting some side jobs and side gigs. And the first culture shock I experienced from being back in the States in an education system was just being a community college student and sitting there and watching teachers and professors and experiencing the flip perspective now that I was on the other side of the classroom in the front. So that was a bit strange for me, and I found myself getting a little bit restless and feeling empathy for my students as they sat through my classes sometimes. But I think the Fulbright experience prepared me a lot for the culture shock that I'm facing right now sometimes, because I often feel that I am a foreigner where I am right now. I'm of, for the most part, a different socioeconomic class, a different race, a different geographical area. I have a different life story. I have a different background from most of my students. So the Fulbright experience hasn't completely eliminated the culture shock. When I came here and discovered corporal punishment still being used in the States very extensively in some areas, that's something that I still struggle to work with and think about. And we still face the same problems with student apathy. There's a lack of connectedness to the outside world. And you deal with harsh parenting and attitudes towards how you manage children. And so that conflicts with trying to get your job done as a teacher and provide the necessary support and scaffolding in class, getting kids to take risks, intellectual risks, personal risks, emotional risks, and trying to develop knowledge, trying to get where they need to be.
Okay, next question. Number 3. I'm currently an EETA, but I will be transitioning to teaching high school English literature. Dawn, how can I apply the skill set learned in an EETA classroom to an American high school literature class?
Which I guess you are not an EETA, so.
Yeah.
I had some experience working with elementary kids. For my second year in Daejeon, I worked at an orphanage every week and doing tutoring and teaching with elementary school kids. But with teaching in general, the same fundamental principles that lead to a successful high school classroom will also lead to a successful elementary classroom. Things like holding positive expectations for everyone, and supporting student learning with firm and consistent norms for the classroom. That helps out in any case. Demonstrating warmth and receptiveness no matter what. Remaining focused on problems and not people. So if you have to reprimand a student, don't reprimand the student. Reprimand the student's behavior. For example, if the 2 words you never want to say to a class are "shut up," but instead privately addressing a behavior, crouching down, getting next to the student and saying, "Hey, could we please make a better choice next time?" and raise our hand if we have a question. That type of approach, and speaking in actionable language. So, for example, how come you don't get it? Instead of saying something like that, which is condescending, switch to things like checking for understanding. Like if you're teaching them fractions, how to multiply fractions, throw up a different example problem and see if a student can lead you through the steps to solve it. So it would be the same things if you're teaching an elementary school lesson about memorizing a song and learning the verses in a different language. Well, if you're running an a high school classroom, just try being yourself, showing them that you care, showing warmth, showing that you're going to support them through their learning, and they'll catch on to it. And there are some good books too that you could look at. There's one book that you might have heard of called Teach Like a Champion.
Oh, yeah, I read it already.
That has some good strategies that work for any classroom. There's also one, let me see if I have it. Yeah, this one here. First Days of School. That's kind of backwards, but by Wong and Wong. This one can help alleviate some stress on the first day of school. If you are walking into a classroom, it gives consistent guidelines and suggestions for what makes a successful classroom, not just in the management sense, but also in the leadership sense. There's also a more lighthearted one that I had lying around. It's The Reluctant Disciplinarian by a guy named Rubinstein. That's Rubinstein. Yeah, those were quite helpful for me as I walked into a high school classroom, because a lot of the Rubinstein in particular, I think he did TFA, so he was walking into classrooms where he was quite different, from a different walk of life and from a different background that his students were. He was inexperienced, didn't know what he was doing. I can't quite say that I know what I'm doing yet. It's my first year teaching in the States, but I'm getting a sense of what to do and what not to do.
All right. Number 4. How did you use or communicate your Fulbright experience to your students? Are they actually interested in hearing about it?
I don't mention the experience explicitly, and I try not to get off on too many tangents, but sometimes I do. I do infuse parts of the Fulbright experience, and I had studied abroad in China for a year as well. One of my initial minors was Chinese studies, and that's one of the reasons I got interested in Korea and was exposed to Korea. But they asked me questions a lot about living in Asia, about living overseas. What can you do overseas? What was it like overseas? In sociology, we did a week on culture, and I used different foods around the world. They were interested in knowing all about the food. They're fascinated with food for some reason. Whenever you start talking about the different types of foods that are available. So in kind of a superficial sense, the Fulbright experience helps with that, but more in a soft power and diplomatic sense, it can help quite a bit. The same experiences that I had trying to communicate with a community that was far different from what I know is very helpful where I am right now. At my first school, I made a point every few days to just go and sit in the utility shed with the guy who handled all the printing for the school, and trying to communicate with him, trying to ask him about the history of the community, the history of the school, and making small steps like that and building that habit of talking to people and going out of your way to meet those people that you wouldn't otherwise meet and being directly in contact with. It helps a lot.
This was in Korea?
Yeah, in Korea. Yeah, and so that, I mean, that helps a lot with just building that habit. And then when you start going to stores in the community, you start talking to other people, and then you learn about the process of gathering information, gathering intelligence about an area. And I do similar things here too. Go to the school, talk to people, sit down and talk to the janitor for a while and just ask them about what's going on. Call parents, have conversations with parents. That's a management technique that's quite effective in the United States, and it's something that you can't do in Korea, but you can do in the States as well. So there are just all sorts of little ways that the Fulbright experience, you don't even realize that you're doing something, but going through the process of being a cultural ambassador and working in a place where you're the outsider, it teaches you what to do in order to do your overall job more effectively.
You may be teaching a subject other than English, but what are the levels of apathy toward your subject, or what are the levels of apathy that you see towards your subject in your classroom, and how do you combat it differently?
In my own case, it'd probably be more productive to start with just where I am. I'm in a part of the country that's a little bit north of a place called the Mississippi Delta. Now, the Mississippi Delta was where Mississippi grew the most of its cotton and where you had a majority slave population before the Civil War. And so all the land there was cleared. It was a completely plantation-based economy, a completely cotton-based export economy. And after the Civil War, not much changed. It was still based on growing, exporting cotton. There was a very, very strong racial divide. Low education levels, not much other industry going on. So the concept of educating people, especially the group of people who got the short end of the stick, the ancestors and the descendants of the laborers, there wasn't sense in the community that they felt in educating them. And even among a lot of the community, the majority of my children are African American, and it's sometimes difficult to have that long historical cyclical poverty mindset built in, not seeing the relevance of education, not having people around them in their community who are familiar with what education can and can't do for you, not having people who can model that for them. That makes it very difficult sometimes to fight the apathy that you see. But one of the things that you can do individually in your classroom is to make content relevant and accessible to students. Students are intrinsically motivated in a lot of things. Kids are interested in just learning about new things, experiencing new things. They're interested in asking questions, being receptive and supportive of any questions that they have about everything. Often helps out and shows to them that they can trust you as their teacher. They can take intellectual risks with you. They can take emotional risks with you. And always maintaining positive expectations, no matter what happens, because many of them are so used to an authoritarian culture where any questioning is squashed, any type of dissent from what someone of positional authority tells them is immediately quashed as well. So once they find out that, and you show to them and demonstrate that you're continually there, you're receptive, you want to teach them what they need to know in order to pass their state tests and move on, that helps with building kind of soft power and, well, I'm speaking in diplomatic terms here, but kind of building rapport with them and getting them to go along on the same page with you as you're trying to lead them to the bigger picture and to the bigger goal of valuing education, valuing learning, and seeing that there is a purpose for going through the steps of learning things, learning to compare things, contrast things, evaluate things, critique things, cite things, synthesize things, because those are the skills that they can ultimately transfer to any part of their life. So sometimes the content that I teach them as a US history, psychology, sociology, ACT prep teacher isn't relevant to them, but the process is relevant to them.
Okay. Number 6. How different is it knowing everything the students are saying in class versus perhaps only having a partial understanding of what they're saying? That is, if you are not a fluent Korean speaker.
Well, Uncle Ben said, with great power comes great responsibility. Sometimes you hear a lot more than you want to hear, but it's a good thing and a bad thing. You learn to develop as a teacher kind of a selective sense of hearing, a selective sense of vision. There are quite outrageous things that are said in classrooms. Because remember, you're dealing with kids that aren't quite by the time they're in high school, they're almost fully physically mature, but the human mind doesn't really fully mature until it's in the early 20s or mid 20s. So they don't quite have a solid grasp of self-regulation yet. So they will say things that are outrageous and ask questions that are outrageous. But on the flip side, usually you can rely on the kids that you've built a relationship and built trust with. You can rely on them to tell you what's going on. because especially in the types of in the type of school district I'm in, a critical needs school district where we're strapped for resources and things aren't always run too efficiently. The kids will find out about everything before we all find out about everything, and they'll start talking about it. You can often get clues as to what's going on in other classrooms, what's going on in the building, if a fight happened, if somebody brought drugs to school, if there were something that you need to know about, if something happened in somebody's family. You'll find out about it from the other kids because they all talk to each other. And taking those little snippets of knowledge that you get and putting them together helps you execute your job more effectively. For example, there are two kids in one of my sections, and they've improved quite a bit since the beginning of the year, but there's an apathy problem. They work a lot. Their families aren't as supportive as their education as they could be, but I didn't know the extent of one of their emotional problems, and his friend was telling me that he wakes up every night with anxiety attacks, and then a week before the third term ended, he woke up and punched out a window and severed his arm all the way down here, damaged some of his nerves. So a lot of them have a lot that's going on. They bring a lot of baggage to the classroom. You don't know everything that's happening, but being receptive to all of the little intelligence that you can pick up from anyone is good. And so, I mean, hearing all of it and being able to understand and interface with it is overwhelming sometimes, but it makes you more invested and more connected with them.
Okay. Number 7. My experience with classroom management here has been very different from my experience in the States. What kinds of changes did you make to your management styles and when you returned home? Sorry, I just butchered that question. What kinds of changes did you make to your management styles when you returned home?
Oh boy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In Korea, I was very fortunate in my first year to have very supportive co-teachers who would help me out with any type of management problem. In my second year, I was fortunate to be in a school where it was a science high school, so they were students who took a test and they were skimmed from the top 1 or 2% of test takers and sent to the science high school. So they wanted to be there. Their parents were on them to focus on their education. The teachers were there, and they knew that they were there to focus on their education, and they made them focus on their education. I mean, I had freshmen and sophomores who were working on Calc 2, Calc 3, Diff EQ problems. So they knew why they were there. They knew that they had to focus on their work, so there weren't as many management problems as there would be at my first school. But here in where I'm teaching right now, I'm pretty much on my own in my classroom. And sending a student to the office to speak with the assistant principal, the principal, is often perceived as a sign of weakness and incompetence. So they say sometimes when you start teaching in the States, don't smile until December. Maintain the illusion of strictness, maintain the illusion of draconian order. I tried doing that as well as I could, but there are other management techniques also that you could fall back on. You could fall back on consequence ladders, and the number one technique is maximizing instructional time. Keep them busy. Keep them working on something, keep them directed towards doing something, and continually show them that no matter what, we're all there together to work on making more academically productive behaviors, learning to regulate ourselves and use our time wisely, learning to move together towards a common goal. So it still confounds me with some of my classes. I will admit that there is a class section or two that I still do pull my hair out over. One of them is a state-tested class section where I'm accountable for their test results. So sometimes that gets a little bit intense. And on top of that, I teach at a very small rural school where nobody really has time to deal with any problems that would happen in your classroom. I'm pretty much on my own. So it's often a delicate balance and a delicate walk, but you manage. Develop a thick skin. It's just like what they tell you at the Fulbright career orientation. Learn to just take things as they come. Don't take anything personally. But if any of you do end up in a critical needs school district, there will be some management issues at the beginning of the year. Teaching is something that you can't prepare for before it. You just have to go through it, experience it for the first year or so, or this is what I tell myself, and this is what others tell me continually as well, and just roll with it. And the second year is probably going to be so much better. I know that my second semester was so much better, so much easier, because I had routines down, I had procedures down, I knew what more productive attitudes and mindsets were towards interfacing with students, interacting with students, giving them appropriate tasks to do. So that helps a lot, and things get quite better.
What advice do you have for those seeking teaching jobs in the U.S. while still living in Korea?
Okay, a good thing to do would probably be to start getting together a portfolio of work that you've done so far. So it could be on a flash drive, it could be an informal evaluation or just an agreement from some people at the schools you're at right now who could vouch for you if you need a recommendation letter, if you need a reference. And a key thing as well is to find out what the state testing requirements is where you want to live. So New York, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, California, they each have their own state departments of education, and they have different requirements for test scores, interviews, paperwork, vital paperwork. Like some of them might require a birth certificate or a social security card. Some of them might require a GRE score if it's a graduate program that's affiliated with a teaching position. And there's a test called the Praxis test, Praxis, and that's something that's required for almost all teachers, no matter what you're doing. And there are specific content area tests. Now, with the Praxis tests that I've looked at the English one, the social studies ones, the special education ones. Most of them seem like they're pretty straightforward. They don't require a whole lot of preparation, unless you're looking at math. If you want to teach high school math, that test can be a little bit beastly. There was one guy in our program who took the math test 7 times before he passed it. So just keep abreast of the different types of requirements there are. That's the second thing. And then the third, try finding people who are working in public schools, private schools, charter schools. They're in graduate programs, they're in alternative route programs. Reach out to them. I mean, overwhelmingly, we want good, solid teachers to join teaching in the States, and I want good, solid teachers to be in my school building with me, teaching the same kids. So we're overwhelmingly receptive. If you ever just send us an email out of the blue and you're a stranger and you identify yourself, hey, why not? And also, if you're interested specifically in my program, Mississippi Teacher Corps, feel free to email me about that. I can get you in contact with the program and let you know more about that.
After the webinar, I'll email everyone Ryan's email, just so you can follow up with further questions. Okay, so that was the end of like the formal list. So now I'm going to take Ryan off of present to everyone mode. Let's see here. Stop presenting. Okay, cool. So is it changing now? Okay, cool. So then this way, since this is being recorded, I think it'll show your faces rather than only Ryan the whole time. So this is like open for questions. So any further questions, guys? Yes, no? Ryan, I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you know that much about like the South in general before? Like, had you ever like been to the South?
I lived in a part of Florida that wasn't really the South anymore.
Okay. Okay. I was just wondering. Okay.
Yeah. Once you start going south of Orlando, I was in Tampa, Florida. It's not really the South anymore. There have been so many people coming in from the Northeast and the Midwest and different parts of the country that it's, yeah, no.
Okay. I'm from Arkansas, and so I believe like the Delta, like not the Mississippi Delta obviously, but like the Arkansas Delta is southeast. And so I'm familiar with like the problems that Arkansas has, and anyway, in those dynamics. And anyway, I just was wondering if you, I mean, the type of South you're in is a completely different South than like a more affluent part of the South. But I was just wondering if, if you had been exposed to that, or if that was like full on like
completely different.
Southern time. Okay.
The Delta region in particular, and it's strange because it's very close to Memphis, and in parts of Memphis, it's extremely affluent. The Delta is very close to Lafayette County. That's where Ole Miss is.
Yeah.
And Lafayette County is one of the fastest growing counties in the states, doing extremely well, extremely prosperous. Ole Miss is doing fantastically. DeSoto County, which is a bit north of the Delta as well, is growing quite phenomenally. And the majority of the growth in this country is actually in states in the southeast. A lot of those regions are doing quite well. But
Ole Miss is super white. Like, literally, their mascot is a rebel. So
it is, and they have problems with that. About 5 years ago, there was a protest on campus, and the KKK came by.
I know. Yeah, I remember
the
that.
Confederate flags everywhere. So there still are very trenchant racial divides in Mississippi, especially in the northern part of the state. In the southern part and the central part, in a lot of those areas, there's a more diversified economy. But a lot of similar problems from back that have haunted the region for a while are still very, very much a part of people's lives here. For example, I live in a place called Marshall County, in a city called Holly Springs, and in the public school here, a block and a half from my house, there is one white kid who goes to that school, and there are about 700 or 800 kids going to that high school. Yet on my street is almost entirely white people. Back when desegregation started happening in the 1960s and 70s, there were these schools that were pejoratively called segregation academies that were formed in many areas in the Mississippi Delta and areas around the Mississippi Delta. And as soon as desegregation happened, you had a lot of the white families flee to these academies, and that's still the way that things are here in Holly Springs, in Marshall County, 50 years later. And it's repeatedly pointed at on both sides of the color divide and color aisle as something that divides the community. Yeah, so this is an exceptional area. It's also an area of the country that it needs a lot of help to get to where it needs to be on economic development level and on a social development level that you would have and enjoy in other parts of the country. Yeah, so my experience here is it's by no means normal, and of course there are experiences in other parts of the country as well, in big, large urban cities. And overall in education, there has been a trend towards resegregation of schools since the 80s and the 90s. So that's another trend to be aware of if you're interested in going into education. And we're now entering into a time of demographic change when the majority of students in the public school system are no longer white.
Rachel, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. Okay, so in Korea, we don't do a lot of standards-based teaching. We don't do a lot of assessment, and I tried to do some of that, creating my own standards and doing some like informal assessments, but I worry about that hurting my portfolio when I go to apply for teaching jobs. So I wondered how you navigated that, to what extent that was a problem for you.
In my program, it wasn't too much of an issue. First and foremost, a lot of times when you're applying to teaching programs, it's consistently been found in a lot of research that I mean, they try going through all of these qualitative measures of what makes for a successful teacher. And the things that you find, we've sat through seminars before in grad school classes where we write on the board, what do we think makes for a successful teacher? And so the thing that they pointed to was having a sense of empathy for children, having a sense of warmth for children, having a like for children, and having just a sense of humor when you're dealing with things are the most important things when you're being a teacher. If people have those innate qualities, then they can eventually learn the assessment-based practices, the assessment-based objectives. Now, it's a bit more difficult with Common Core, especially with English and math, because Common Core has rolled out in most states with English and math in particular. It doesn't affect me as a social studies teacher too much yet. Social studies and natural sciences in the state of Mississippi and a lot of other states surrounding this area still largely operate off of the state-based standards and the state-based objectives. But Common Core is a challenge. It challenges students to make cognitive leaps that they otherwise wouldn't be making in the curriculum that they had before. And it wasn't, I like Common Core. I think it's something that's needed in this country, but the way that it was rolled out and executed wasn't too effective. They implemented it across the board for almost all grade levels when it probably would have been a better idea. If they're asking you to do so many higher order tests, to start at one grade level and just start with one and gradually build from there. Okay, we start in third grade. Next year, have third grade and fourth grade do it. The year after, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. So that's it's something that causes political uproar as well among a lot of school boards, in communities, in parent households. Students will bring home math homework that parents don't know how to help them with because it's worded differently and it asks for questions that people just don't know how to teach kids. So the standards-based education is kind of still in flux, and I'd suggest in your application, highlight your positive qualities in dealing with kids, your positive experiences in dealing with kids. I know it sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's, from what I've heard from other people as well, that's what they're primarily looking for. They want people who just have the basics down. Because you can teach people anything, but those innate qualities, like how do you teach someone empathy? How do you teach someone have a sense of warmth for children and a sense of compassion for dealing with children?
Cool. Any other questions? Yes, no? Okay.
I have one if no one else has one.
Okay. Go for it, Rachel.
Okay, so right now you're doing a combination teaching, and you have a full-time teaching job, and you're also doing grad school stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When you started this process, did you go straight into looking for teaching jobs, or were you looking at graduate schools and you fell into the teaching thing? How did that develop? Because I ask because I do have a question about grad programs. I've been looking at them, but I would probably want to start teaching first. Anyway, there's a lot going on in my head. So what was your journey like?
Well, I came back from Korea not knowing what I wanted to do. However, I got interested in occupational therapy, so I had completed some shadowing hours, and the community college classes I was doing was occupational therapy prereqs, so Bio 1, anatomy and physiology, psychology classes, and then I did some shadowing. I worked at a restaurant for the homeless where they serve free meals to homeless people in Tampa Bay. And also people who are just low income. There are a lot of people who aren't homeless but have other problems that give them insecurity economically, and so I just kind of ambled around working on stuff like that, and I applied on a whim to Mississippi Teacher Corps, and I had also applied for a master's program in China to go back there and do a master's degree there. So I got everything done to do both of the programs. And I wasn't quite sure which one to pick. And when the director called me and said, "Hey, we have a social studies position for you," I was like, "Oh, great." And then I agonized about it over the course of about a week, thought about it, and then finally I called him back, and it was a 55%, 45% decision, but I said, yeah, sure, why not? I'll try teaching. So it wasn't really something that I had planned. It's something I really did on a whim, but I don't regret the decision. I think it was absolutely the right decision, the proper decision.
Are you glad that you did like a program with the master's degree in it, as opposed to like a Teach for America or something?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah,
What is the
I've
master's
heard
degree
mixed
in?
things. What's that?
What's the master's degree in?
It's in curriculum and design. So Mississippi Teacher Corps, it requires a 2-year commitment to teach in a critical needs school district. And then there's a fully funded free master's degree along with it. And every other weekend, they rent out hotel rooms in Oxford for us. Oxford is where University of Mississippi is. And so you stay there and you go to classes from 8 a.m. to 5. It's a part-time load, so it's between 6 and 9 graduate credits a semester. And
First year teaching.
what's that?
I said, and your first year teaching, that sounds exhausting.
It is quite. It is quite. That's one reason yeah, it is quite a. I mean, I have a giant stack of papers to go through in my classroom. I'm going to head over right after we're done. And I am a bit of a workaholic. I mean, I wake up at 2:30 or 3 every morning to start my lesson plans for the day because I have 3 or 4 preps every day that I need to get ready. Get to school at 5 or 5:30, and the kids get there at 7. So that's just, it's a style of work that I prefer. I like doing that better than staying up into the wee hours of the night. But it is quite exhausting with the academic work as well. And that's another thing, depending on where you start teaching, if you are going to go to an area that's resource strapped, that doesn't necessarily have everything that you need to run your classroom successfully, there are a lot of things that you need to string together. There are also, if you've heard of different types of websites like Donors Choose, GoFundMe, those are good resources to keep in mind. And there are also all sorts of free school supply drives. You can go around to different places in the community and just get extra resources. Like whenever I go to the hotel, I ask them for some extra pens because I need extra supplies to give to my students in the classroom because most of them don't remember supplies, they don't bring supplies. So finding constant sources of things that can keep your classroom running smoothly becomes a concern on your mind too that you're always thinking about.
Okay, so what are there other programs? So like my best friend is doing Memphis teaching residency. I think that one might be like explicitly Christian. I'm not sure, but are there other programs like your program where you get the grad program, like the grad school internal of the teaching experience?
I think there's one in New York City called New York City Teaching Fellows.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if they fully fund the grad school option.
Okay.
It's partly funded. It's not fully funded, but yeah.
With this program, it's absolutely fully funded. And you get extra perks too. Over the summer, you do something called summer school, where you bring in the first year new initiates to the program, and you go through an intensive training with them. And the second year teachers run it for the first 2 weeks, and then we hand it off to the first years. But during that time, we get a small stipend, and we get a room paid for on the university campus for 3 months. And they offer individualized support. The program is small enough, so there are 30 to 35 people every year. And you can have personal conversations with the director. You can reach out to second, third, and fourth year teachers who are in the area, and they'll share their Google Drives with you. They'll share all their lesson plans, all their handouts, all their resources. We generally live together and find places to rent out wherever we're teaching. So there's a really solid support network. It's very small and close-knit, and you're never alone. and they're completely there 100% to support you. With larger programs, it's difficult for them to offer that type of intimacy and that type of support.
Okay. Any other questions?
Mm-hmm.
I think we're 5 minutes from the end time, but
why did you decide to do the Mississippi teaching corps and not teaching corps in a different city or one of the teacher residencies that we previously mentioned?
It's kind of it's personally kind of the way that I am. I'm kind of random and adventurous, and I couldn't. That's part of it. Another part of it was that the program seemed like it was really solid, and if I were going to try out teaching, this seemed like it would be the program that would support me the most.
Mm.
The free grad degree was definitely an incentive, but what really drew me to it was just the sense of, you know, it's a completely new thing. It's something I probably won't have a chance to experience again in my life. And when I looked at it in terms of opportunity costs and what else I would be doing with my time, I figured that it was the best option, and I love it. It's great.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Awesome. Well, Ryan, thanks so much for your time. Thank you for taking an hour out of your very, very busy schedule to talk about your program and your experience teaching. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, that's great.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you for your patience. That was about 5 minutes late.
Yeah, so I'll send everyone your email, Ryan, and then if they have questions or anything, then they can contact you individually.
Okay,
So.
I can send you some PDFs of stuff that's useful. It's still relevant to you in Korea as well.
Mm.
If you've heard of Dina's Bikes Foldables, those would probably be pretty successful in your classrooms. I can send you a big PDF with all that stuff on it. My kids eat stuff up.
Yeah, no, do that, and then I'll forward that on to the participants.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much again, and
Thank you.
have a great day. Yeah.
Yeah, if you have any
good
questions,
day.
just let me know. See ya.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye. Bye.